All right, I'm going to go through and just tell you about some of the things that I'd like you to know or remember. And this is from a presentation that I was able to give in Russia just through our international contacts, because Russia is an emerging part of the rotomoulding industry. And this is based on quite a lot of information that people have shared with us. Rotomoulding is a global industry, and I think it's really important for all of our staff to know that what we do is important, no matter what we make, but that it's relatively small. So there's less than 7,000 rotomoulding companies all around the world. So not too many of them. In fact, that's not companies, that's plants. Less than 7,000 rotomoulding plants around the world. It uses just over 1.5 million tonnes of polyethylene, and again, these are estimates. It's very hard to pin down people about what their actual usage is, so we've gotten as close as we can, but the major trends are important, and it just goes to show that even though, you know, at one stage Australia was one of the superstars of the global industry because we were pumping out water tanks because everybody wanted one, now we're not quite so important. But USA and Canada, North America are clearly the biggest users of material for rotomoulding, and that's mainly because they've got a range of products where they can make tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of parts and just push them out to a much bigger population. Okay, so what else is going on in this global industry? It's pretty stagnant since almost the last 10 years. It really hasn't changed that much. Business has moved around the world a little bit. The two markets that we were told 10 years ago would boom were India and Brazil. And both of those areas saw some really rapid growth, again around water tanks. In India, the market was taken almost completely by blow moulding because their rainwater tanks are much smaller. So blow moulding went, ooh, that's a nice market, we'll have that. And I want you to think about all of these things and how much industry can move around the globe. And in Brazil, again, that boomed, but it was taken by Mexican rotomoulders who knew how to play the game bit better than the Brazilian rotomoulders did when it came to getting government to award tenders. Material prices are affected by global movement now, so they move up and down probably more than they ever did before, and anything that happens in the world regarding polyethylene can affect the price here. We see that now much more with petrol and other things as well. There's certainly been some consolidation in the industry, and we see that here as well, where there's less rotomoulding companies as various plants are bought and sold. That's happening everywhere. High margin companies just continue to do well. They're always insulated, and David referred to it with his lump of artistically produced plastic. We've been talking for a long time about trying to find a market for yourselves where you're the only one who can do a particular thing, whether that's foaming or another kind of process. It's all about trying to be in a much smaller pool and playing there successfully. Excuse me. And there's been quite limited investment by the supply chain in doing new things and doing them differently. A little bit more coming through with machines now, which is good to see, but there's so much other so many other ways that we could innovate. You really can compete from anywhere now, and we're seeing the benefits and the problems that come with this globally. So you'll see the McDonald's playgrounds. I think everybody knows about those. What you may not know is that Galloway in New Zealand used to be the only supplier of those. So 20 years ago, Galloway held the global contract and he exported those playgrounds to 38 countries around the world. That market now has spread right around the world and to a whole lot of different companies with changes. The kayak industry has experienced exactly the same problem. It's a real picture. So, again, the kayak industry was very strong in Australia and New Zealand for a long time, and in North America and in Europe. When China opened up, it took a lot of the actual rotomoulders took their business to China, but what happened was that China then started making kayaks that looked almost exactly the same and sending them back to Australia and New Zealand and Europe. So that market's now almost totally disappeared from down here. We do still make kayaks here. They tend to be high-end. But again, you can lose a whole market fairly quickly in a global environment. Okay. Too much of the industry is commoditised, and again, this is really talking about tanks for us here, but it may not be tanks. In different areas of the world, it's different products. But we get sucked into a commoditised market by price cutting. And price cutting is never really a long-term solution. Almost every rotomoulder that has disappeared was involved in price cutting at some stage through that process. So I get the temptation. But there are other higher-end solutions, and rotolining is one of them. Probably most of you know that Melrose looking into this market just at the moment, but there isn't really very many people in this part of the world doing rotolining. And yet there is a call for it from mining companies and shipping companies who are looking to do that kind of thing. This is rotolining that we saw done in China. What I love about this is that we could never get away with this. So this man will stand in this huge metal tank and bead weld mesh onto the inside of the tank for about 3 days with no ventilation and no confined space regulation, and then eventually they'll just spin some polyethylene round in it and it'll stick onto the fencing that's in there, and they've got a rotolined product. So Tim and Steve might have to work out how to do that a bit differently. So it's actually really simple equipment, but it's more complicated to do it. What's great news is that that's not the only opportunity of separating yourself from your competitors. Wastewater Treatment have done it. This is a product manufactured by Talex in Queensland. So this is a concrete replacement. It's foamed. It's a very complicated technical product, but they're able to charge a lot for it because they're competing against concrete. And even though they might be slightly more expensive than concrete on this product, there's not so many delivery and installation issues. So it's a preferred option for some of the industry. No one else does it. Gavin from Perth, Gavin McDonald from Perth, specialised, he's retired now, but he specialised in these huge foamed products with massive mould-in inserts, like 1.5 tonne metal inserts. So high-risk products that if they went wrong would break your heart, and the polyethylene would have to be burned off and you'd have to start again. But again, finding a way to separate yourself. We were talking about this 2 days ago. There is no company that does this now, that does it in Perth like this. So you may do similar products, but there's no one who replaced Gavin when this company stopped manufacturing these parts. Goff Plastics has done some fantastic road systems. So you'll see that the systems across these little hexagonal pieces are injection moulded, but the pylons on the outside that they're attached to are rotomoulded. So again, environmental solutions are going to have a great opportunity in the future. This is Balmoral Tanks based in Scotland. They were a tank manufacturer. They had a fairly nasty experience with some failures in a court case that you can read all about if you want to Google it. But they went completely out of the tank market, and now they supply the offshore drilling industry with very high-end products, and they're the only ones in the world that can do it. Some places in the world are better at what they do, and sometimes this is controversial as well. Obviously, you've heard about Mouse quite a lot, but the mould manufacturers, Persico is another. There's a few in Europe that do things completely differently. These are profit pins, which is a result of some work done at Queen's University on increasing heat transfer. And what that does, what those pins do, is just increase the surface temperature on your mould so that you can get more heat into it. The way the industry's interpreted that usually is just roughing up the outside of the mould, but you can put pins on it. You probably talked about that already. These are they call them mouse holes, but they're really just little bits of silicone that you can add to the mould. So instead of having to trim afterwards, the material just flows around the silicone and the part comes out with holes already formed. So all of these solutions can help you really separate yourself from what your competitors can do. David's talked a lot about this, so I won't dwell here, but the whole cycle has to be controlled, and we're learning more and more about that all the time. So it isn't just about design and that phase. It isn't just about material testing. It isn't only about looking at what's happening in your process, in your heating and in your cooling. It's really the whole system, thinking about post-mould procedures as well, so mould in or mould on graphics, and all of those things are important. Testing absolutely should be a priority, and I think, David, did you talk to them about the material testing guide? And no? So ARMA's got a material testing guide that will show you how to perform many of these tests, tell you where to get the equipment. We don't sell it, so there's nothing in it for us. But we believe that every rotomoulder should know as much about the material that they're using as their suppliers do, because that's a real partnership. That's when you start to really get involved with each other. So if you're interested in those guides, just let us know. Lots of information that we've already talked about here. Rotomoulding can be dangerous, and I know David has already talked to you about safety, but it's something I do want to highlight. I'd like to think about ways we can help you to improve the safety culture in your plant to protect your really valuable employees. Obviously, combustible dust is an issue, and yet I still see, when I go to visit plants, piles of polyethylene powder hanging off some of the higher spaces. I still see staff using compressed air to blow the material around, which is really not the best way to do it. Vacuuming or even a broom would be better. So just thinking about those things, bringing it to everyone's mind. Here you go, Graham, this is just for you. So Graham has an alternative theory we haven't discussed about why moulds blow up in ovens. But essentially, I think what we've agreed on is that steel wool in the vent tube plus mould release, and this would be a chemical mould release, and combustible dust equals boom. So thinking about all of those things and just trying to maybe not use the solution you've used for the last 20 years, but looking at what's available. The real issue that I want you to keep in mind is that if you are ever in trouble and there's evidence that there was a safer solution and you haven't used it, that will put you in trouble. So there are safer solutions to some of these things. It's just a cultural change. We released the fire and explosion guide this past year, so if you don't have a copy of that, you can get one on the Dropbox. We've got hard copies. There's a series of posters that you can put up throughout the plant just to remind everybody about that, and thinking about training in evacuation and all of those things is super important. I do just want to let you know that this guide was also informed by rotomoulders that have had fires, catastrophic fires. And it's full of what they would have liked to know before they had the fire and what they learned after they had the fire. So it's really worth a read. And we've talked about changes that you can make to your equipment and your guarding and your ovens and all of those sorts of things to make people safe. We probably haven't talked about loading and unloading, but again, ARMA has a guide to talk about some of these issues, some equipment that's available to make that a bit safer. And there's been 2 unloading deaths in Australia and 2 in New Zealand related to rotomoulding. There was just a couple of weeks ago another very serious accident with a homeowner related to unloading a rainwater tank. So it does happen. It's worth thinking about. We don't all get the sexy job of delivering our tanks by helicopter, although I would like to do that. I can't fly a helicopter, but it would be fun. Sometimes the people who are delivering our tanks for us don't get it right either, and that can cause problems for you. And some moulders have come up with solutions. So I don't know, this is called the flipper. Is the flipper your idea that Simon Goff stole, or Simon's idea that you stole, or somebody else's idea?
Simon again?
No.
We did it.
So this little, or this system for just sliding a tank off, and the flipper just flips out and lets you unload the tank fairly safely. It won't let it escape at least, and gives you some control. Simon Goff's happy to make the plans for that available free, just so that other tank manufacturers can take advantage of their experience. Working at height obviously is a problem. Confined spaces is also a problem, and things that you need to be aware of that aren't about what happens in the factory necessarily. Staff ignoring training is something else. We've got a lot of videos, and it's topical, of course, with the tragedy at Superior last week, but forklifts really are very dangerous, and it's something that we need to keep reminding our staff of over and over again, that forklift safety is imperative. We've got another range of safety posters. So David talked about heat stress. We've got some solutions there. Forklift safety as well, hand tools. All of these are free. You can either order them from us, or you can just download the file and get as many printed as you want at your local printers. Standards are important as well, but they have to be managed, and I've updated you about what's happened with, or what's happening with 4766. So the big changes there are just that instead of it being an above ground standard, we hope that it will be an above and below ground standard. It will be for water and chemical tanks, and we hope to allow multiple layers in tanks for the first time and fix a few other things. So hopefully what we'll get to is a point where we can have multi-layer products in areas like bushfire-prone zones where we can't supply right now because we can't pass the bushfire flame test. And as an industry, we suffer for this because steel tank manufacturers who paid for this test to be done on a poly tank send the pictures to regulators all the time and say poly's not great, poly's not safe, and you shouldn't allow it. So we need to start coming up with a solution that fights these kinds of claims. Then we also have the problem of what people do to your products once they get them, and how they try and find their own innovative solutions to get things working the way that they want them. And this is where regulators then will come to the association and say, if you don't help us find a solution, we'll eliminate those products, which is essentially what happened to polyethylene road barriers, where they've almost been eliminated from Australian roads. So standards are important. We want them because we want that level playing field I talked about this morning. We think it's important. You need to work together. We need to speak together as an industry and really own that. We've got some big challenges coming in our industry. We love this kind of networking. One of my favourite things about getting you all together is there's so much you can share that isn't competitive. So we don't expect you to share competitive things, but we love it when you let us know that there's a problem, or you talk to each other and we can find a solution. We have so many resources that get hidden in your busy days and in our days because we don't have enough time to talk to you about it all. What I'd like you to remember, and Michelle would like you to remember, is if you're having problems, come to ARMA. Come and ask us and we'll try and find a solution. If we don't know, we've got a network, a global network of people who can help. We want to speak on behalf of the industry, particularly on an emerging issue, which is plastics affecting the environment. I think we're going to see a lot more negative press and media, and we need to separate ourselves from one-use plastics and talk about how fantastic our rotomoulded products are for the environment. Of course, we've got the app. I've talked to you about that already. The Rotomoulding Academy, and I think the last thing that I wanted to tell you about was the testing regime. So I'm sure I've got slides about that. Did I? Okay, let's go. Did I really? Must have been a while back. Sorry, everyone. Was I getting excited, going through, trying not to... Up. Oh, okay. Testing should be a priority. Here we go. This is what David wanted me to show you. So this is a really exciting passion project for me, the non-destructive post-production test for rotomoulding. So instead of having to cut out a piece and do a drop impact test, what we're trying to find is a way to prove cure without having to do that. And Rapid from New South Wales, one of the rotomoulding companies from New South Wales, told us that they were using this equine, the cow and horse ultrasound, to look at broken bones. They were looking through the wall of their tanks, you remember, and these are the pictures that they got. So when you just use that equipment, you can see this is good cure. It's good because it's mainly black, there's no air here, and there's just a few bubbles on the inner surface of the part, which is equivalent to a good cure. This is an undercure, see there's still a lot of air in there and a lot of bubbles in the middle of the part, which is under, and here where these lines are, this is overcure, so this is burned. And that's essentially what the images look like. The work that we've undertaken is to take that further, so we're working with the French Institute of Composites in Aerospace on a project funded by ARMA, the Italians, the French and the Germans. We're at the moment starting the science, so the test pieces are being created by Queen's University. They're sending them to the Institute for us. They'll all be impact tested as well as ultrasound tested so that we can prove the results. And then the piece of equipment that they're using is far more advanced than the horse and cow ultrasound. And what it will be able to do is to show us a coloured picture of what the wall looks like. The next stage after we've proved the science will be just to write a very simple piece of image recognition software. So the machine will say there's enough black in the right place and enough white in the right place, so that's a pass-fail. Yes?
And also measure the wall thickness for you at the same time.
It will. It will also measure the wall thickness for you at the right time. So the whole idea of this is no matter what you make, you'll talk to your engineer or designer, you'll identify the part of the piece that you're making that is at most risk. Now that might be 5 different areas where there's likely to be thinning or thickening or some other problem. And you'll be able to just quickly test that with a little bit of gel on the sidewall of the part. You'll get your ultrasound image of each of those and it will say yes, 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 and then you'll get a pass and you can send the product out. You don't have to even wait for it to cool completely, and you certainly for large tanks won't have to keep it and let it cure for 24 hours before you do a drop impact test. It will work on parts from 2 mil thick through to 20 mil thick. We may just need to have 2 different probes. And the only other thing I can tell you at the moment is that the piece of equipment that's being used by the Institute is about €50,000, but that is like using a Ferrari. So we're very aware that we have to find a solution that's cost effective and at least the same cost as drop impact would be. So it's looking good. We think we'll be ready by the middle of next year. And it will be a global solution for a global industry that started here with a moulder going, I think I might have something. So an amazing story. Okay, so this is the last thing that I want you to take away is I do believe that for rotomoulding we can separate ourselves from some of the rest of the plastics industry and that the future is in resilience. We're seeing more and more global events. The UN's putting a lot of money at trying to find solutions to housing on borders, eradicating tent cities, handling waste, rainwater and grey water and all of those different things, and that's exactly the part of the world that our industry speaks to. So lots of potential there. And we try and market how great rotomoulding is. Again, these resources are available to all of our members free of charge, so I hope you'll use them. Has anybody seen these or got them in their boardroom or their office or anything? Fantastic products that highlight everything that rotomoulding can do. So, thank you so much for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed the day today. Please remember you can contact us if you want some of the information that David was talking about. We'll try and gather that all together. And thanks everyone.